Well, hello, this is Jeff Gaudiosi, and you're on misplacedstraws.com, where music comes to life. And my guest today is quite simply a legend. He's responsible for some of the most iconic music in history, and his band Jethro Tull is back with their first record of original music this century. The record is called the Zealot Gene, the band is Jethro Tull, and the man is Ian Anderson. Welcome, Ian.
Well, hi there. What can I do to help you?
Well, I'm actually going to start with a question that I usually end every interview with, but it just seems fitting to begin here. We mentioned this is the first original Jethro Tull record in a very long time. Do you see this as a new beginning for the band? What's next for Jethro Tull?
Well, the next thing is hopefully the resumption of a lot of concert dates that have been postponed from 2020 and 2021. And hopefully, as things progress during this year, we can get those shows to happen, because right now, as you know, the situation is not very good, with Omicron firing on all cylinders throughout Europe and indeed other countries too. So, we can but hope that things will go ahead. Beyond that, I'm working on a new album for release in 2023. And but just to clarify on this issue of, as you put it, the first new Jethro Tull studio album in this century. Of course, in 2004, there was a Jethro Tull Christmas album. In 2011, I started work on a new project, which was released really under my own name, but Thick as a Brick 2. And in 2014, there was Homo Eroticus. And 2017, there was a Jethro Tull String Quartets album. And now, started in 2017, in terms of recording, finally has released the Zealot Gene album. So when you add in all the box sets and all of the remixes and remastered stuff, it's been a pretty constant stream of attention-seeking and money-grabbing product that has found its way into the public domain. So it's not as if we've been resting on any laurels or crawling under a stone. We've been pretty active and done, well, this century. I guess we've probably managed something, like more than 1,000 concerts this century.
You've mentioned how with this record, the genesis of it really goes back to 2016, 2017. You were able to record a lot of it live, which is something you're very proud of with this sound and this record. With the pandemic, you're probably one of the last records to record that way. As everyone now, it has to be file sharing and people can't be in the same room. Do you see an advantage to being able to record when you're all together and the band gets to play it live in the studio?
Well, yes, I'm glad you made that slight amendment there. It was recorded in a live fashion, but not live in the sense of being a live performance in front of an audience. We were in a studio, but we rehearse everything prior to going in to record. And so the recording experience with most Jethro Tull albums since 1968 has been playing live in the studio, in the sense of all the guys performing at the same time, not broken up into little bits. And that began long before the digital age and file sharing, that there were people who did make records, one musician at a time. I remember Bob Ezrin telling me that Pink Floyd had recorded The Wall, and he was baffled by the fact that at no point during the recording process any more than one member of the band was in the studio at any one time. That's what he said. Yeah. But these days, of course, it is possible to do things bit by bit, piece by piece. And I know I performed as a guest on many people's records in the last few years, not only in the pandemic, but in the last few years, where it's all been about, my contributing by sending an audio file, but never actually being in the studio with any other artist or producer. And that's okay. But when it comes to doing my stuff, I much prefer working with the band. And after we've spent some time rehearsing, which is probably going to be on average, maybe every 2 days we rehearse 3 songs, in the sense of it being fairly productive. We fine tune things, and then we go into the studio, and we would hope to record typically 2 tracks in a day. Mm-hmm. But because of the realities of acoustic instruments, figuring into the instrumental array of sounds that they have to really be recorded separately, because I'm the acoustic guy in the band. I play the flute and I sing and play acoustic guitar and other acoustic instruments. So my parts are usually done again as overdubs, because the guide tracks that I may have sung while the band were playing, doing takes in the studio, are somewhat polluted and punctuated by my shouting, "Second chorus coming now, 2, 3, 4." So, you have the guide tracks that people follow, but it's generally speaking, more exhilarating, more of an atmospheric experience to try to perform as you would do it live on stage. That's the way I like to work, and in the way that most often we have worked historically. So I don't know how other people do it, but it's sometimes hard to find recording studios that do facilitate that process that way, because many of them that describe themselves as professional recording studios actually only have a control room and maybe a little room where one person can be in there in sound isolation, performing at a time. But we need to be in a place that is of decent size, where you can actually spread out around a room and perform with a degree of separation, using direct injection of instruments into the mixing board, and acoustic screens around the drums and any other sources that produce a noise in the studio. But when you do that, there is inevitably some leak, and that means it's not very easy anyway to re-record bits of it, because there's usually a trace of guitar coming through the drum mics, and vice versa. Some drums that you will hear in the background in the microphone that's stuck in front of a guitar speaker. So, there are certain things that you have to do that mean you really got to stick with what you've got in the studio. And on the Zealot Gene, Florian Opale, the guitar player, was playing his guitar solos live in the studio as we recorded the masters. And that, is quite a brave thing to do, and probably not very common. Usually a producer would say, well, I'll tell you what, when it comes to the guitar solo, just don't play anything, and then we'll record it separately afterwards. But Florian actually played them live in the studio, all of them, so which is good.
And when it comes to Jethro Tull, they've always been one of the bands where fans obsess over the lyrics. They look for all of the meanings. And for the Zealot Gene, it's a very biblical record. And in the package, we even have the verses from the Bible that inspired each song.
Well, I have to pull you up on that. No, what inspired the songs was the one-word list of strong human emotions. It was my starting point for writing the album. I decided I would write a song, each one of them about a different powerful human emotion. And having compiled a list of one-word emotions like vengeance, hate, greed, envy, and then some nice stuff like love and companionship, loyalty, compassion, I looked at my list and thought, oh, those are words I remember reading in the Bible. And so in a fanciful way, I did an internet search of references to those words as they appeared in the King James translation of the Bible, Old and New Testaments. And then I copied and pasted some of those just as a reference point, but I wasn't necessarily depending on biblical text. It was just a useful comparison point. And one or two of the songs I stuck with the historic perspective, the storytelling of some of that stuff. The other songs, for the most part, were songs where I'm using the present day realities of living in this world. That's my main focus. And the fact that there's some relationship to some biblical text is just, for me, an interesting exercise from a, from an intellectual and from a songwriting point of view. It's nice to have some reference points, but usually what I do is I work from visual images and the biblical text, in some cases, like the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah, and Lot and his wife fleeing the city, and Lot's wife turning to face the mayhem behind her and being turned into a pillar of salt. I had a kind of image of what that might have looked like, and that image translated into some poor civilian turning to face a 2,000-foot airburst of the first nuclear weapon to be dropped in anger on the poor folks of Hiroshima in August of 1945. And so the song is really about that. It's not about Sodom and Gomorrah, but it's a point of reference. It's another little kind of visual reference that I had when I was thinking about the song. And I made a couple of references to that biblical tale, but the song itself is soundly set in 1945 in recent history times, as opposed to 3, 4, 5,000 years ago.
And
so I'm not setting out to illustrate the Bible here.
Right.
I'm not. This is not a Bible lesson. This is just taking as examples elements of biblical text and then trying to see how they might relate to the world we live in today.
And the Zealot Gene really has the characteristics of a classic Jethro Tull record, in that it has the heavier rock pieces, it has the more progressive passages, and it has those acoustic parts that you're so known for. When you begin writing a song, do you have an idea in mind of where that song is heading, or do you just sort of let it take you as you write it?
Well, along the way, you begin to firm up your idea. So by the time I'd made some simple demos for the band, just using my phone to record some simple demos and then sending those to the guys along with all the lyrics and the chord sheets. So they had the basis on which they could prepare for band rehearsals together in the studio. By that stage, I had most of the ingredients for each song. And and that's fine, but there's still a little bit of room to add new ideas and fine tune things when we're rehearsing. But we did 7 tracks that way in 2017. The other 5 ended up being, by necessity, recorded at home by me, because the pandemic during the last 2 years just resulted in my having to get on and finish the album by doing it that way. And the other guys did, in those cases, send some audio files to incorporate into the mix. But because I was working alone at home, I was using an acoustic guitar and other instruments, and rather than the way they would have been done, those same songs, if they'd been done by the band, they would have had quite a different musical feel. But in a way, that turned out perhaps for the best, because I think it gave the album a little bit more depth sonically and a little more dynamic range, because of the 5 songs that then had, really essentially an acoustic feel, rather than be, bass and drums and electric guitar kind of tracks. So it probably worked out for the best, I think.
Without a doubt. And your current band, for the most part, these guys have been with you for quite a while now. And I know in the past you said that one of the reasons why you felt this should be a Jethro Tull record is because this band has been with you and played the Tull music, and that this is very much a band record. What is it about this group of musicians and this material that has worked so well with what you do that brought it back to Jethro Tull?
Well, for a start, 3 of them live not too far away from me, which is a whole lot better than some previous editions of Jethro Tull when we were separated by hundreds of miles or even many thousands of miles in the case of Don Perry, who lived in Los Angeles. So, first thing is they're only, less than an hour away from me. We can convene to work fairly quickly. But also, I guess they come from different musical backgrounds, and having people whose background and musical preference is for jazz, or for jazz funk in the case of the drummer, or classical music in the case of John O'Hara, then you have different layers of musical style that you can incorporate into the arrangements of songs, which I think is more interesting than it would be if everybody's musical preference and interest was just in hard rock music. I think it might be more focused and more, potentially more of a powerful musical form, but I think it would lack the subtlety and the interest that comes from musicians whose background is in different music forms. I mean, I'm probably, personally speaking, my background is more in terms of folk music, and even going back to the earliest days, with blues. But that seems to be a good balance that we have. For me, the interesting challenge of writing music, keeping it in mind that somebody is going to probably think of a little way to make this a rather more complex jazz chord, whereas I might have just chosen to use an open fifth, being a simple soul that I am. So it's all about variation and complementing sometimes what could be opposing musical styles, but I think we bring it all together in the final arrangements.
And when you're putting this record together and hopefully eventually being able to go out and play concerts and tour the record, I think there's always going to be a segment that says, well, unless, this group of people are together, then, you can't call it Jethro Tull. Does it ever give you pause, or even, come across your mind of people that question calling an album like the Zealot Gene Jethro Tull?
Not really, no. I mean, I can call it whatever I want. I mean, as far as the name Jethro Tull in any musical context is concerned, for many, many years, my company has owned that trademark and copyright in the name. So, I mean, I can call it whatever I want. And what other people might think is not of much importance to me, because I'm the guy who just gets on and makes the music. I don't really worry about what people are thinking about it. And I suspect that what lies behind your question is that in terms of original band members, well, there's only me. And even Martin Barr, you see, was not an original member of Jethro Tull. He joined after a year or so. And it's, I suspect that what lies behind your question is that inevitable one about Martin Barr not being in the band. And therefore, there may be some people who get their knickers in a twist saying, well, you can't call it Jethro Tull because Martin's not there. Well, Martin has his own life and his own band. And that's something we talked about 20 odd years ago. I was encouraging Martin to develop his own parallel musical career, and took him a long time to really get around to doing that. And I'm absolutely sure that there's no way he would want to turn the clock back and be simply the guitar player in Jethro Tull, given that he can be his own boss and do exactly what he likes to do during the remaining years of his professional musical life. And same thing for me. I don't have forever. I'm just getting on doing things, and hopefully able to enjoy a little while longer being able to continue as a working musician. But we did play 20 concerts last year, in the latter part of the year, when COVID regulations and rules allowed us to get in and out of a few countries. We did do 20 shows, but prior to that, we had an 18-month spell of no I mean, I didn't see the guys in the band for a year and a half, and during that year and a half, they and the road crew, they were out of work. They had no money, and so it was, quite an important thing, really, for as an employer, for me to be able to put things at least back on the road to a degree in order that they could generate a little bit of income again. And this year is not looking too good so far. We've had to already postpone 2 tours in the month of January. And, who knows what February, March, and April will bring, because we don't really know what's going to happen with Omicron, whether the apparently declining infection rates in the UK are a model for elsewhere, or whether it's just a blip as a result of fewer people being tested and fewer people actually either admitting to having Omicron, which is obviously a milder form of the disease, we're pretty sure, but maybe not bothering to rather like Mr. Djokovic, not necessarily admitting that they've got COVID and carrying on as usual. So it's when you look at the bigger picture, it's time is of the essence. We've got to crack on and do these things while we can.
Yeah.
And frankly, if my main, the criterion really for deciding if something is if something is more of an acoustic album of singer-songwriter material, then I guess I'd probably say that was an Ian Anderson album. If it's a band album of rock music and all the guys being there, then I'm more likely to think, well, if it fits in broadly to the Jethro Tull repertoire, that canon of music styles, if it tends to belong to that bigger repertoire in terms of its sound and musical stylings, then I would then think it's probably better to call it Jethro Tull. And so that's what it is. But when we go and play Jethro Tull repertoire, the repertoire is bigger than the musicians, including me. It's really a vast body of work which was released under the name Jethro Tull. Yeah. And if that's what we're playing, then I feel it's appropriate to describe that concert as a Jethro Tull concert. And so that's what usually I do, but in order that people know that I'm actually going to be there and be on the stage, it may say Ian Anderson presents, Jethro Tull in concert, or Jethro Tull the Prog Years, or whatever it might be. So I think it's quite important that people realize this is not a tribute band. This is actually the real deal. And as I say, I can legally call it what I want. Nobody else can.
And we've been spending some time here with the amazing Ian Anderson. The new Jethro Tull record, The Zealot Gene, is out everywhere on January 28th. And before I let you go, Ian, I think that if you ask most music fans to list their top snub for the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, it's Jethro Tull. Do you have any thoughts on the Hall of Fame and Tull's place in it?
Well, so far, it's a sense of relief that I haven't had to face the embarrassing prospect of being invited into the Hall of Fame, to be inducted into the Hall of Fame, because I've long maintained the position that the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame is an American institution about American-inspired music. It doesn't necessarily preclude musicians of other nationalities, but I think it's got to be essentially, it's about American music, not necessarily exactly rock and roll. We're not talking about, Chuck Berry or Little Richard or Elvis Presley or whatever, but, we're talking broadly speaking, pop and rock music. And, but there is a certain sort of American styling, and certainly the Rolling Stones, for example, would fit that perfectly. Yeah. And because they owe everything to American music, whereas, I guess Jethro Tull, there's a lot of, apart from the first album, I would say, not a lot of Americana in the musical styles that I tend to work with. So I don't think we are appropriate as inductees into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. But the other side of the coin is when the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame opened its doors, it did so with a few Jethro Tull exhibits, which I provided to them. And they were in Cleveland when the place was shiny and new, and I went to take a look. But it's not as if we're divorced from that whole thing entirely. But I think there's a slight difference when it comes to being inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. And luckily, I'm not going to be faced with that embarrassment of having to claim that I'm washing my hair that night, and I can't actually come to wherever it is they do such things, because historically, Jan Wenner, who is the as far as I know, still one of the kingpins who sits on that board and decides who will be admitted through its grand portals. He's always had a huge dislike of Jethro Tull from Rolling Stone days onwards, and so we're not on his list of favorites for sure, and that's fine. That's fine by me. But I genuinely, I respect the institution of the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame enormously, but I don't think we really belong in there. And I can think of a few artists who probably do, who are not part of that, and they owe so much to American music, and American music owes something to them too, because they have continued to keep that flame of musical Americana alive throughout the world, even if they're not citizens of the USA.
Well, and again, the new record is the Zealot Gene. It's out everywhere January 28th. It's a great record. Every time I listen to it, I pick out something new and it grows. It's exactly what you would want a Jethro Tull record to do. Ian, thank you so much for taking the time. Best of luck with the record, and hopefully we'll catch you on the road should the world ever clear up a bit.
Well, we certainly hope so. If of course, I'm not washing my hair. If I can find where I left it, that is. Somewhere lying around the house, if I can find it. Anyway, good to talk to you, and take care. We'll hope to see you guys soon, somewhere along the way.
Stay safe, my friend. Thank you.
Take care. Thank you. Bye-bye.